Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Subtext Podcast Archives. These are the long-lost episodes of the Subtext that were originally produced between 2015 and 2017. In 2018, the Subtext moved to American Theater Magazine, and we've been producing the pod there monthly ever since. These time capsules are being shared here in their entirety, including plenty of outdated references and advertisements for events far in the past. If you enjoy them, please subscribe to the current podcast feed for the Subtext or stream new episodes on the website for American Theater Magazine. Thank you for listening.
I grew up in New Hampshire. We moved around a lot in the first few years of my life, but to younger me, every town was about the same. The constant moving hit a sort of climax when my family moved several times during my fourth grade year. At one point, we lived in a quaint little town called Peterborough for a couple months in the middle of the school year. It wasn't easy for a 10-year-old to jump from school to school, especially a 10-year-old with a tenuous grasp on his own emotions. I guess that's probably true for any 10-year-old. I got picked on a lot because I was the new kid, constantly. My last name is Polak, and apparently young kids in 1980s New Hampshire know all the Polish jokes ever written. I got in a lot of fights. I was constantly sent home from school. This was usually a treat to me, except in Peterborough. We lived on the bottom level of an apartment complex tucked into the woods not far from the center of town. There was no internet back then. I didn't play video games. I was too lazy to read books. Cable TV was for the privileged families living in houses. There wasn't much for me to do between awkward meals with my older sister and single mom, both trying to adapt to each new place just like I was. So I would venture outside into the woods the apartment abutted. This is where I spent most of my time in Peterborough, lonely wandering through a little brook, befriending trees, throwing rocks. I had recently seen Return of the Jedi, and I imagined this forest was Endor, and I was some sort of hero. I had my own Ewoks by my side. The birch trees were my guardians. I felt safe. Our stay was brief. We moved out of this town not long after my fantasies began to evolve into stories. I never wrote anything down. Not until recently, actually. A few months ago, I wrote this memory into a play. I gifted it to one of my characters, who I realized was lonely like me. I was recently talking to somebody about the pros and cons of loneliness. They asked me if I could remember the first time I felt lonely. I thought back to this time in my life. To Peterborough, to birch trees. That was the moment I became aware loneliness was a thing. It was also the time I first told a story, so now I'm thinking, is loneliness the reason I write? If my childhood was more grounded or less chaotic, would I even have ventured into the woods? I really have no idea. This thought kind of boggles me. As I struggle through the chicken or eggness of it all, I try and simply accept my life the way it is. Was the way it was, I am the way I am. I try to keep from dwelling and just write, and from time to time return to Peterborough, to these moments of loneliness, and use them in my work so I can feel like the struggle might have been worth it in the end. Welcome to the Subtext, the Playwrights Talking to Playwrights podcast. This month's episode is sponsored by New Play Exchange. The New Play Exchange is flipping the script on the ways playwrights and producers find each other. It's the world's largest cloud-based database of new scripts, enhanced with robust search and filter tools, crowdsourced recommendations of plays from industry professionals, a targeted opportunities module, and smart social networking. Sign up at newplayexchange.org and start exploring. End of promo. I love everything about New Play Exchange, seriously. If you're a playwright and you want to have another channel through which your work can reach the world, go check it out. The more people who use it, the more successful the program becomes, and I'm not being paid to say that. I really believe it. Moving on, a couple housekeeping things before we get to the interview. Thank you to all who have gone to iTunes, rated, and commented on the subtext. You are all kind and generous people. If there are any more of you kind and generous people, please go to iTunes now and share your thoughts on what we're doing here. Also, and I usually save this for the end of the episode, but I'm saying it here now in case you're the type of person who skips the end bits, like tossing away the crust of bread. You can tweet us at Subtext Podcast or email us thesubtextpodcast@gmail.com. All right, end of the business. Now let's move on to our interview with playwright Stefanie Zadravec.
My kids were small, and I thought that when they went to elementary school it would get easier, but now they have personalities, and imagine that.
Right.
And they have like activities that they have to do. So like I'm sort of juggling like, oh, they have lives now. Like when they're babies, it's really, I actually had an easy time because first they nap, and then they don't really do things. But now it's like, oh, on Thursdays he goes to robot class. You know, he's like engineering class or soccer or whatever they do. Like, and I don't do a million of those kinds of things. I'm not like, I don't program my children, but like they have things that they do. And so they have lives, children these days. They don't just come home and play.
I love robot class. I love that robot class is a thing.
It's a robot, like they build like, well, he's like a little engineer. So
Yeah.
comes home and
It just reminds me of being a kid, and like I would invent robot class, like in my mind. Like imagine how wonderful it would be if robot class was a thing where we could make robots.
well, he goes to, and now he has his spy class after school.
Spy class.
So they made like invisible ink, this thing up like with lemon juice, and then you put a flame under it, and he wrote me like a letter. With spy ink, and and like it's down in the wood shop in his school.
Yeah.
And they do spy things.
But they can't tell you.
No.
Right?
But they, and it's all making, like, it's in the woods, taught by the wood shop.
Yeah.
I love the wood shop lady. It's like, it's a woman. She's like, that's like my son's, like, ideal woman. She runs, like, the hammers and saws room in the school. And she's a babe. So.
Doesn't sound anything like my school growing up.
No, it's a cool, like, it's like inquiry-based learning. So like everything, I think it's sort of the new way of learning. Like we had to learn information, but with learning today, information is available. Like we had to memorize information. We had to acquire information.
Right.
Information no longer needs to be acquired because information is available like that. So what people have to learn is how to discern false information from real information, what to do with information, how to problem solve with information. So that's what inquiry-based learning is like having problems and knowing how to solve problems. And some of it is group learning, also knowing how to work in a, like, I would do it this way, you would do it that way, and knowing that you don't have to have all the answers yourself, which I kind of love. I mean, certainly you have to learn how to take a test because that's going to be part of your life, but also to know that you do like a group planning project and plan a city or something, but you're going to have to use math and science and all this other stuff to do it, and Group A used multiplication to figure this thing out, and they got much closer than Group B that just added everything, and then they missed it because they didn't count right, and so it took them longer. So Group A had a more efficient process, and
right.
So and it's all like a learning thing of how to do that, and scientific method, how to learn like the difference between false information on the internet and scientific information, because there's a lot of crap. So it's a really interesting thing about learning, whereas we had to memorize a lot of facts.
Right, that seems to be the crux of my public school education growing up, was primarily just remembering things.
Yeah, verbs, and I can still recite prepositions for you.
Is the expectation with your kids' education that you as a parent are participating when they're not in school? Like when they're back at home, is the school's expectation or the teacher's expectation that you are a participant in their learning?
I think some are, like, I think that's like the core. I think public school, I know that some public schools, it's like kindergarten had like 20 hours of homework a week. One of the students that is in my son's school, we have to read 15 minutes a day, but we were doing that anyway. Whether it's we're reading to him out of a longer book, or he's reading to us out of a smaller book, or he's reading to himself out of a book that's right for his own reading. And now he's going to be bringing home readers that he's reading in school. And then my other son has homework that comes home every day. And he had that since kindergarten, but because he has autism, it's about, a lot of it was just about like following through and the doing the homework. And now, and then it got harder because it's like challenging. And he's actually really academically gifted, so he can, so it's about doing the work and just, and the routine of it and staying focused and doing it and reiterating what he did in school.
And your kids are Colin and Martin,
Yes.
right? And Colin was the one that was diagnosed with autism?
Yeah.
How old was he when?
2 years and change. 2 years and change. He passed his first evaluation. He went in and made eye contact with everyone in the room.
Right.
So they missed it. And they didn't ask the
Was
big
that
question.
like the test? Does the child make eye contact? If yes, we're
One
fine.
of the things, there's a bunch of evaluators, and so when a child isn't making eye contact, that's a big one. And he, for whatever reason, but instead of saying, "Oh, was this a great day?" Would you say that's a great day for your child, or that's a typical reaction for your child? They never asked that question, and I would have said, no, this was a banner day for Colin. Like the fact that he came in and acknowledged everybody, he did everything everybody asked except for one thing. So he was sort of diagnosed with sensory issues. He's verbal. And then the other thing that there was a student who gave us the questionnaire, and of course you don't want your child to have autism. So, when she was saying, does he walk on his toes? And I would say, well, sometimes. He doesn't do it all the time. And I thought that you had to do those behaviors all the time too, because you're going back and forth. Like one day he would just seem so disconnected, and I'd be like, oh God, yeah. And then another day he'd be really connected. And so I wasn't sure, and you're going back and forth in your mind. And although deep down you have a nagging sense that it's yes. But so I said, well, I don't know, 20% of the time, but if you say, Colin, walk on your feet, he'll go back down on his feet. Well, she checked off no, she should have checked off yes. It doesn't matter if you walk on your toes 10% of the time or 90% of the time. He does it. Because the behaviors come and go, and they, like head banging or licking, like he'll have times where he's licking, like chewing his shirt intensively, or mouthing things, and then it'll come back down. So whatever these behaviors are, or echolalia, like repetitive speech, he'll do it very intensely, and he'll do it when he's nervous. Like a lot of us do our little tics when we're nervous, or
right. But was there a specific event that made you think, oh, we should bring Colin in? Or was there a specific behavior that was repeating that made you think,
My husband noticed, I had noticed little things along the way. My husband noticed that he had stopped looking at him when he came home from work, and that he had stopped saying hello. And also, we have twins, so it wasn't so much a regression, a little bit, but a lack of progression. So they both had a lot of words, but Colin was stuck with like nouns, like boat, 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 whereas Martin was like, boat goes, like he was trying to communicate with the words that he had, and he was trying to tell stories with the 2 words that he could string together, and he was trying to play with me with those 2 or 3 words, and Colin was just shoving that boat in my face and saying boat. So he had 40 or 50 words, but he wasn't doing anything with them. And then he would pass that train right across his face. That's a big one, like rolling a train back in front of his eyes. is in like a trance way, or lining up his toys. Another one is like if you have spin wheels of a toy, like if you have a train or a bicycle and you flip it upside down and you just spin the wheels.
Right.
But again, he would do that sometimes, and then other times he would play trains on the train track. So again, it was like, well, sometimes he plays trains, but then sometimes he just lines them up. And so I wasn't sure. And that's where that first evaluator was incorrect, because the fact that he was starting to do it was a sign. So we missed about 6 months of services. And then when we went back 6 months later, it was like severely autistic, you know. I mean, there was no question. She before she was done, she goes, "It's yes, I just have to add up the numbers of how much, you know."
Oh, so this is a quantifiable.
Yeah, the ADOS, they can do numbers. So, I mean, and that's always sort of like a big like gut punch, because it's like we get these numbers back that say highly autistic or severely autistic, and yet he's really bright. But I've learned, and I'm always sort of educating people. I think people think that Asperger's, or what people call high functioning, like kids that sort of can go to public school and just seem a little odd or quirky, that's that those kids aren't necessarily highly cognitive, that you can be severely autistic and have high cognitive. My son can do some fractions, and he knows all his prime numbers, and he can do some 6th grade math, and he's in 1st grade. But he's also highly autistic, and he can't fully get himself dressed. He gets too distracted, or he can't always, you know, pull his pants up after he goes to the bathroom, and he won't finish dinner. Sometimes I'm still feeding him with a spoon. So he's both highly autistic and highly intelligent. And that's actually what Dr. Asperger had discovered about autistics. He called them little professors, is that they had these bright things, but they were also incapable of doing other things. So I think that's a big misconception about autism itself, is that it's what we find in the education system, is that kids who are severely autistic, they put them in low cognitive, who need like two or three teachers in the classroom. They're classrooms that have low cognitive expectation.
Right.
And that's not necessarily the case. A lot of the kids, and even nonverbal kids, are incredibly bright. They just don't communicate. And once you give a lot of the kids who now have iPads, it's like they're soaring. They just don't have the verbal capabilities, but there's extraordinary stuff going on. It has nothing to do with
Did you have any exposure or experience with autistic children before Colin?
My sister. But I didn't know. My sister was older. She's born in the early 60s, and she was diagnosed as mentally retarded at the time. So she was one of those people lumped in, like in schools with a lot of kids with Down syndrome and sort of just these general things. But she's really bright. She's really funny. And I remember when Rain Man came out, just being like, you know, aside from the math genius part, he's so much like Karen, you know, like, and he talked like her, and I was like, wow. And again, it just didn't click. And then when Colin was getting diagnosed, they asked if there was any developmental disabilities in our families, and I mentioned my sister, and I said, well, she doesn't have Down syndrome, but, you know, she'll remember your birthday, what kind of car you drive, you know, if you're Irish and your father's Italian, and she'll never forget your birthday. And the doctor kind of looked at me with her head cocked, like, and I was like, oh my God, my sister has autism.
Wow.
So I grew up with someone with autism.
So your sister essentially lived 50 years of her life before anybody said...
They still don't. I mean, I don't know that she would call herself as having autism, but but it's really interesting. And I think that's the whole thing with all the people who are sort of in the vaccine freak out camp, is that there isn't a rise in the number of people who are being diagnosed, is that there's a giant population that were never diagnosed, because in 1962 the autism spectrum didn't include those people. They were just very severe. The autism spectrum was just very narrow, and then it widened much later. I think in the late 60s, there was a woman in England who had happened upon, everyone was institutionalized, and then she happened upon Asperger's research because he had gotten Hitler kind of took over and his research, but she came across his research and was like, oh my God, he was studying all these people, and she took it over and yeah.
I wanna go back a little bit because I'm really curious about some things we talked about before we started recording, and a lot of how it relates to your life now with the kids and whatnot. So you were saying earlier about how you came to writing kind of late. You didn't go to grad school and all of that. I'm curious, what was your trajectory before you started writing?
I was an actor in New York. I did a lot of new plays, and I did commercials, and I was working with a theater company called the Barrow Group, and shortly after September 11th, there just wasn't a lot of work that year. So that summer, I took my first writing class because we used to do this thing called the Blue Plate Special, and I used to write these funny essays, and I did one of them as a monologue, and it went over really well. And so I took the class, and after the first class, I had to leave early that night, and my teacher sort of followed me out of the room. She said, oh, I needed to finish telling you something. And she came out and she goes, hey, I know you think you're an actor, but you're really a writer.
What?
And I was like, oh, thanks. Yeah, that's nice.
Did that feel like it insults your acting?
No,
or
not
just
at all.
Compliments to your writing?
Because she was too. She was, it's Arlene Hutton who, and she said, and I was like, oh, yeah, but I can't write a play. I mean, I don't know how to write a play. And she's like, no, plot, structure, I can teach you all that. But what you brought in, what's in your diet, I can't teach that. She said, you're a writer. And so I kept going back, and I studied with her for like a year or two, and I just sort of dabbled in short plays for a long time. And because I think I couldn't get out of my head my identity as an actor. I had sort of built a life as an actor, and my parents were writers, and that's what they did. And
what form?
My mother was a poet, and my dad was a journalist, which if you kind of look at my plays, that kind of makes sense too. There's a little poetry in my plays, and there's a little news in my plays, and it's all kind of thrown together. But I just never thought about it. And then, I started doing it, and the reception was so immediate and positive. Like, I had a couple short plays in this evening, and it became like a main stage show. So it was technically like an off-Broadway show. I got an agent from that. She said, oh, can you send me a short full length? I hadn't finished it. So I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm revising it. So can I send it to you in like 3 weeks? She's like, oh, great. So I had to finish it. I got my first scholarship because you had to send 55 pages of a full length. I only had 55 pages of a full length.
Right.
So I got in. Then the response to that full length, I sent it to directors I had worked with, and sent it around, and to the public and to Second Stage in New York, and they read it and they emailed me. I was emailing with theaters I was not getting auditions with at the time, and because it had gotten to a point where I had left my agent, and then it was this thing where, like, when you're in your 30s and you don't have an agent, and then a casting director who I worked with a lot was helping me get appointments with new agents, and he's like, oh, and we love her, and she's booked a couple TV spots, and we love Stefanie. And they're like, yeah, but what's wrong with her that she doesn't have an agent? And I was just getting really fed up with that kind of like, well, then what's wrong with her kind of thing? Because I didn't go to grad school for acting either. So it was that thing where they couldn't place me kind of thing. So here I was emailing with theaters that wouldn't see me as an actor. So the first play was that sort of family play, this play between the sisters, and they were like, the writing is great. It just, it feels familiar, and it's, and it was kind of sitcom-ish. And
were you writing for yourself?
I was just writing to see if I could write a full-length play. I was like, I don't even know if I can write a full-length play. And I sent it to places, and it got in like festivals and things like that. And then the most response was like, from my agent, was like, everybody really likes your writing, but what people want right now is a war play, because this was Iraq time. And so I was like, fine, screw it, I'll write a war play. So I was in a lab with the Barrow Group. There were 3 of us that they wanted to do like a playwrights lab. Scott Organ, Laurel Manning, and myself. And I didn't feel like I could write about Iraq. But I thought, I wonder if I could write a play like that, because everything I'd written up to that point was funny and relationships and that kind of thing.
Why don't you think you could write about Iraq?
I just didn't feel like I was a political expert. I didn't feel like I was immersed in it. I didn't feel like I knew how to approach a subject. Or that I was connected enough to the material. It felt vast and complicated, and I just felt like, ah. So I wrote about Bosnia, because I had worked in a restaurant with all these people from Kosovo during the Kosovo part of the war. And so I started this play, and I'd had this idea for just the opening of a play. So I just thought, well, I'll just start there. And I had been very moved by that war for me, and it was personal. And I think that's the key was that war for me was, when I was younger, was the war where I realized God, the Bosnian War was the one for me that was, it was the war that, like, I didn't really get that rape as warfare, like that everything about war hit home for me as an adult. It was like my first adult war. I was visiting London. I was visiting friends in London, and I was hearing the news that people listened to in London and how they were hearing about it every day. And I was realizing that when I'm home listening to the television, I never heard about it. And I was like, grow up, Stefanie. Monica Lewinsky scandal was happening at the time. And I was working in this restaurant as a bartender. And the owner of the restaurant was from Kosovo. About 95% of the people who worked in the restaurant were from Kosovo. I think 3 of us, 2 bartenders, other bartenders were playwrights. I was an actor, and then 2 other people were American. And everyone else was from Kosovo, and they weren't hearing from their families. One person's best friend's home was bombed by mistake by NATO, and so she lost her best friend. But everyone's just like, and the dress, and the sperm on the dress, and just sort of like this stupid, horrible scandal that's all anyone would talk about. And these waiters were just walking around like zombies, but it was this very expensive Upper East Side restaurant. And so they're having to serve everybody who wants to engage with them about Monica Lewinsky. And so it was really sort of grotesque. And it was, I remember also that trip to London. There's that iconic photo of the woman running, it's called Sniper Alley, in a suit, she's sort of running through sniper fire, but she's going to work. And I think I'd seen those kinds of photos in the Middle East, and it's that typical thing that we talk about, and we talked about it after the Paris thing recently, why nobody reported about Lebanon and other things, which was that those places felt far away, and something about Eastern Europe and Bosnia felt closer. And my heritage is Slovenian, which is, I mean, Slovenia broke off from former Yugoslavia in like 2 weeks, but that part of Europe felt closer, and to sort of see like people were going to war to work in the middle of war, or trying to, and there were just images from that war that I was seeing that were striking me, and I was thinking about them. Although, as I wrote, there were pieces of Iraq that hit me, like in the play. There's 2 kitchens, one in a small town called Visegrad and one in Sarajevo. And the woman in Sarajevo, on this day, she has power. The power goes on. And so she cooks, and she's looking for her Mahler tape. She's going to listen to this symphony. And she's so excited. And she's an old woman. And it's because of a little news tidbit I'd heard in Fallujah. It was just like an offhand thing I'd heard on the radio, which was that there had been no power there for over a year. And I was like, and just imagining what that was like, it was just something, those kinds of details just sort of.
And you gave that detail to the Bosnian.
Yes, and because I came across the same detail, which was that the power would go on and off, and anywhere that you have war that's happening in eastern Ukraine, it'll go off for 2 months, or, it's one of those things that now I'm like, how's the plumbing? When you hear like that battle is, I'm like, have they cut off the water yet?
Right.
That's sort of the kind of thing that I look for. Are the old people getting their pension checks, or have they stopped? Are they stealing the money? Those are the things like I look for as like how war is affecting people and who it's happening to. And that was my way in to tell the story. And I was moved to tell the story because I had read about the 40,000 women that were raped. They had rape camps, and they would, a woman would be raped 17 times in one day by these Serb soldiers. And so I thought that the play would start in this kitchen, and then it would go off to these rape camps. It would be this play of like 17 women actors, and women would love me for creating all these women roles. And it ended up like the lead actor is now like a 24-year-old guy with an AK-47. But every time I took the play out of the kitchen, the dialogue got really stilted. It was like every bad cliche of the Gestapo movie, of like, move it, get over here. Like I didn't know what they would say to each other. But as long as I kept the play in the kitchen, I could make them talk. Like they were hungry. I could think of things like what would it be, what was going on? Like there was no more food. There was like things that they wanted from each other. She didn't know what to pack. Like he was taking her there, and I could think of things that could happen in the 2 kitchens. So
you were saying that before this you were writing a lot of comedies. And then you got a prompt to write this play. Well, prompt, but like a suggestion you should write a war play. Did it change your relationship to subject?
Yes. I mean, because I suddenly wrote a play with impact. And so I think not only the effect that the play had, the reception that it had, but also the effect that it had on me, on audiences, on what it felt like to write a play that mattered, that was a little bit deeper than just... I still write, there's still humor in my plays. I'm writing a play set in Ukraine right now, in the days after the plane that got shot down, the Malaysian Air MH17, and it's funny. So there's humor in all of my plays. But the subjects are about, I think one theme is sort of how to live in a time of chaos, or how do we live in a time of chaos, or how do we find hope in a time of chaos, is something that I return to in different ways.
Do you find that to be true for your life? Like, is that how you see your life?
problem. Yeah. I think so. I think, finding ways to go to, to kind of reevaluate, to finding a way to reframe your life, I think of Electric Baby. I think of like to retell the story, like to be given a new set of circumstances and then to have to redesign everything in a way that to find new meaning or to find a new purpose. I mean, certainly like having like kids with, they had medical issues when they were born. They were born very premature, and we've had some serious medical issues, and then autism. Everything has changed. I've had friendships fall away, and I don't have as much time, and we have new friends, and we just live our lives differently. I mean, you don't just go anywhere. I have to think like, oh, is this just overwhelming for Colin? So we won't go to that birthday party, or we just don't do the same kinds of things that other people do. And yet the reality that we have, like not having anyone over for Thanksgiving, like what's Thanksgiving without other people?
Mm-hmm.
It felt ridiculous in some way to cook an entire Thanksgiving meal, and neither of my children, by the way, like turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, or any of it. So it felt particularly stupid to do all of that preparation when they're going to maybe eat one bite of it and then say, I don't really like it. And yet we had the most fun Thanksgiving. I didn't have to fully clean the house. And, we just sort of find a new way through it. And so, yeah, I think it is a reflection of the way we've had to figure out how to live.
Did you talk about your adjustment, if there was one? I assume there must have been, when the kids were born. So you were writing before you had kids. How did your writing life get impacted by their arrival?
Before they were born, I was doing commercials and supporting my writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was doing both. And when I got pregnant, my first kind of real professional production happened, which was Theater J did the first production of Honey Brown Eyes in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So I was literally like on opening, I was just at the point where I announced that I was pregnant, although because I was having twins, everyone totally knew. I was so fat. I was like, I thought I hid, and they were like, everyone knew you were pregnant. And I was so giant. But I was like, I'm pregnant, by the way.
Everyone's like, yeah. Anyway.
So the two happened at the same time, and then the play won the Helen Hayes Award, but I didn't go because the boys were in the NICU.
Mm-hmm.
So when that happened, other things came my way, and so I had these two things always at the same time.
And you didn't have to sacrifice your writing?
No, I mean, I think there were about 6 months where I was thinking about Electric Baby. I had that idea for that play before they were born, the germ of it, and they were about 7 months old when I kind of went to sit down to start writing again,
mm-hmm.
when they napped. And it was easy to write then. Like, it was fun to go write when they were that age. And then Colin was 11 months old and I was about 40 pages into the play about a baby with a rare and mysterious illness when Colin was admitted to the hospital for 14 days and came out attached to an oxygen tube and never came off it for the next 2.5 years. And in the next 6 months, he was diagnosed with a rare and mysterious illness. His lung disease, only 500 kids in the world have it. So I was writing a play about a baby with a rare and mysterious illness, and my son got one. And what was very weird was right in the middle of that, they thought he had one thing, like something called bronchiolitis obliterans, which is basically lung damage brought on by a bad case of bronchitis or RSV.
Mm-hmm.
And but then we went back and we were looking at some video of him getting a bath when he was 8 weeks old, and we saw the lung retractions, and we were like, he's had this all along, because you could see in his ribs were going in and out, and he was breathing really fast, which was one of the symptoms when he was only 8 weeks old, way before 11 months. Mm-hmm. So we showed it to the doctor, and he was like, grudgingly admitted that maybe there was something else going on. And he said, I think you're going to need to see one of these interstitial lung disease doctors. And they would do a battery of tests, but we would have to go somewhere else because there's only a few centers in America that can do this, run this pathology, this series of tests. I mean, he said we could do the biopsy here, but they would mess up all the tests, and you don't want to put your kid through a lung biopsy and then mess up the tests. So we had like a genetic test sent to California, and we went out to Long Island and tested for cystic fibrosis. Like, we had to rule out a couple of things. Mm-hmm. And I thought we were going to either go to either Boston or Duke or maybe Johns Hopkins. Those are places we'd been talking about. And during that time, I reset the play to Pittsburgh. Randomly, just because my play was set in New York, and I thought New York's one of those places where people are either affluent or poor, and I wanted people to be I wanted it to feel kind of urban, but also kind of middle of the road, so I just randomly was like, Pittsburgh, that feels right. And we went back to the doctor for an appointment, and he said, yeah, so I found someone to do the biopsy, you'll be going to Pittsburgh. And I was like, oh. And we went to Pittsburgh Children's, which is this phenomenal hospital, and Ronald McDonald House is like attached. I mean, Brooklyn hospitals are horrible. Like, you go to Pittsburgh, we would go every year to see our doctor, who's now like our friend. He goes out to Oregon Shakespeare every summer. I mean, he's like, you have a commission with Oregon Shakespeare? I go to Oregon Shakespeare. Like, we love Dr. Kurland. But he... it's like Disney World. I mean, it's designed for children, and it's like, it was our vacation because we had no money. We spent all our money on medical bills, so this would be our vacation every year, is to rent a car, load it up with oxygen tanks, and go to Pittsburgh Children's Hospital. So we did the test, and they were looking at interstitial lung diseases are not good. They can require a lung transplant. The one thing that they thought was that he had a surfactant, I don't know if it was surfactant B or surfactant C, which would have required a lung transplant, and only a certain portion of those last. Which I knew. My husband didn't know that at the time, so I was like, but what about this one, knee-high? I know he doesn't present with all of the symptoms, but he presents with 3 of the 5 main symptoms, and and the doctor was like, I don't know, but well, we'll see tomorrow. You never know. Moms have a way of being right. And he's the only doctor who ever said that, by the way.
That moms have a way of always being right?
Moms have a way of being right, and he said, but you never know, And also we found Dr. Kurland had gone to my high school. We just made that connection at some point. And he came in after the biopsy results, and he said, well, Mom, you're right. So knee-high is the one benign lung disease. So although he would have to be on oxygen anywhere from, it could have been 6 months, it could have been 8 years, 24/7 or part of the day, and we would have to monitor him. He would not die from it. It's just he would just need supplemental oxygen. So that was like the best news. We were already we would run around with a tank of oxygen, sort of the size of a wine bottle, maybe carry 2 with us if we were going out. And then a 25-foot length of, dog leash of tubing, and then run around after him all over the playground.
Do you believe in the sort of metaphysical connection between your writing and or whatever you want to call it?
That play is magic. I do. With that play, the play is sort of, when you watch Electric Baby, there's a point midway where sort of the audience suddenly realizes, oh, and the character's like, we're in a fairy tale. How did that happen? We were watching a play, and around the time that the woman goes to Natalia's apartment, it's like, we're all about 6 inches off the floor. When did that happen? Like, we're watching a play and then suddenly we're like, oh. And I think it is, and she's telling stories, but there's a story in there of the crow, and they're all real Romanian or Yoruba folklores that I just retold, and the characters are retelling it in their own words. And, you know, I can't even say it like without crying. I mean, it's like I wrote these stories that I didn't even know that I would need. The only folk tale that I wrote on my own is the one that they tell of how they met each other, the Nigerian man and the Romanian woman, who are the parents of the baby. That's me. I wrote that one. But yeah, there's something weird and magical about that play.
That's Electric Baby.
Yeah. I mean, it's so weird and funny and sad and odd, and it's kind of bizarre. I mean, I'm not a big sort of believer person, but I do. It's a play about reframing the story of your life, or reframing. It's about receiving. It was inspired by and written for like those things in your life when you receive a diagnosis or a situation, or there's a car accident or something happens that you cannot change. It's not like, okay, this is going to be something I adjust, or I can change that. I'm going to work to make it better. It's like you can't change it. You know, you got the terminal diagnosis. There's nothing you can do. So then what? And so I was just interested in that. Whoops. So there was, yeah. And I mean, it was weird. And then I had written to, there's a theater company in Pittsburgh called Quantum Theater, which is, they do, I'll say environmental productions. They're not site specific. Some of them are, but mostly they look for a location around Pittsburgh to create a production around an area. And because I had learned about Carla because my husband worked with her sister. And I had met her sister, and she said, oh, my sister has this amazing theater company in Pittsburgh, and they did really international shows. So I had sent her Honey Brown Eyes, because it's international, because I'd noticed that a lot of the plays were international that she had done. And I didn't really hear from her. And then I thought, well, I'm going to send her this play because it's set in Pittsburgh. Maybe she'd be interested. And so I contacted her, and, you know, she said, you know, I feel so bad. I loved Honey Brown Eyes, but I have a thing about children in peril. I can't handle it. And Honey Brown Eyes, there's a 12-year-old girl who is in peril. They, you know, because they raped young women. And there's a young woman a girl who's in peril for most of the play. She's in danger. And she said, so I couldn't deal with it. But the play is stunning, and I never told you. And then I felt so bad, and so I just never reached out. And I said, oh, okay, because I gave you the play. And I said, oh, well, then you won't want to do this because the baby dies. So, okay, you know. And never do that, by the way. Don't shoot yourself in the foot ahead of time. So, cut to like a week later, Daniela Topol, director, was in Pittsburgh, and Daniela and Carla go back years. Daniela went to Carnegie Mellon and knew Carla from working at Pittsburgh Public Theater, and they were having coffee, and she's like, oh, what are you working on? What do you know? And Daniela and I had been developing the play at Playwright's Realm in New York. We'd been developing the play together for the better part of a year. We were going to Playpen together that summer to work on it. And she said, I'm working on this amazing play, The Electric Baby. And Carla said, I was just sent the play, but I think it's something like, I don't think I'm gonna like it because like the baby. And Daniela, God bless her, just says, oh God, no, it's so much more than that. Just read it. Oh, God, no, just read it. And 2 days later, she called me and she's like, I have to do your play next year.
Wow.
So, yes, never, like, don't sell yourself short, but just make them read it first, because you never know. Because the baby isn't really in peril.
It's interesting, though, that idea of a child in peril, or whatever you want, however you want to describe it, is something that seems to be recurring in your plays.
Oh, yeah, and
right?
This one, too.
So, colony collapse is happening soon at Boston Court, and there are many children in peril in that play, or at least talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
is that
another
unconscious?
one. My husband pointed that out once. I said, because I felt like, oh, my plays are all different, and I teach a course on like how to write essays where they say like, what are some themes? And I was like, I don't have any like similarities between my plays. And he's like, there's always like a young kid in trouble in a play who's about to be killed in one of your plays. I was like, there is. I'm sure there's some therapist out there who can answer this question better than I could.
That's why I'm here to talk to you today.
But
your husband asked me to talk to you.
I have some unresolved issues.
Well, I mean, colony collapse is about a lot of things. It's not exclusively about children in peril, although that's a
theme. I always get self-conscious about it because there was an article I read where Young Cheen Lee said, oh, God, in plays where one more play with a dead baby is a plot grenade. And so, like, because it does add drama. I mean, it is, and I don't think I consciously do anything like that. In this case, I was, there's always a germ for it that is real. I mean, the germ of the electric baby came from a friend whose son died, but of course I wasn't going to write about that, and that was the beginning of thinking about people who face something that they can't change, and then just start thinking about it and how it changes into something else, and how would I tell a story about that and make it my own. And it became funny and fantastical and magical. And then in this play, I had been thinking about, those first kids that go missing. When there were 2 sisters that went missing when I grew up, near a mall. The Lyon sisters.
Where did you grow up, by the way?
In Maryland, outside D.C., and they went missing near the Wheaton Plaza Mall. And actually, they are just now finding where they might be. They were digging for them this summer.
Oh, wow.
I think the family has had some idea of these people, but, without DNA or admissions. But all these years later, I think they disappeared in the late 70s. But it's that sort of time where you're like, never go to the mall. Or your mom would never just, your mom used to drop you off at the movies and then maybe be like 40 minutes late to pick you up.
Sure, yeah.
There was no or you would just walk. We would just walk. Right now, there were some parents that were arrested for letting their young kids walk to this park near where I grew up.
I had to define the term latchkey kid to a millennial recently because they're like the concept was I was like, that was normal.
Yeah.
That was normal to be alone after school for a couple hours while mom, dad are at work, and you're 9, 10 years old. It's just sort of what life was in the 70s and early 80s.
And so these parents are like being arrested because the older sister's watching the younger sister, and they walk I think they're only walking 3 or 4 blocks, but the neighbors were calling child services, and I was like, I think I was walking down to buy my mother a carton of cigarettes and then sign for it and then go back home and I'm not from West Virginia,
right.
but or whatever, and then get myself a soda and some candy. I don't know, 5, 6, 7. I can't remember, because sometimes I may have been sent down with an older sister or with a group of kids, or maybe not. And maybe I said I'd be going with a group of kids, and then I wouldn't, because I didn't feel like it. So I'd say, yeah, I'm going down with them. And then I wouldn't, because I didn't want to. I know that the incidence of missing children and strangers abducting children off the side of the road is way less than we think.
Sure.
In researching this play, certainly one might not get that feeling from watching this play, because that's the incidence. It's more people who are related to kids or a family member. Those are the higher incidence of.
I'm not sure how to ask this question. What was the idea that kicked off colony collapse? Was it colony collapse disorder? Was it missing children? Was it people recovering from addiction? Was there one thing that triggered the play?
I think there was the idea of missing kids, and then there was another idea when I submitted the proposal for this commission for which it was written, about a woman who disappeared in Paris 100 years ago. And the people who accepted the commission said, yeah, your proposal, we love your plays. The proposal feels a little intellectual. And what I didn't know at the time to say was, like when you asked me, why didn't you write about Iraq? I don't write intellectual plays, which is what I should have said. Later, someone said, you don't write intellectual plays. But obviously my proposal sounded fancy or something. So the play would not have ended up intellectual. But they said they weren't interested in the Paris part of it, but they were very compelled by this idea of children that go missing in America. So that was there. And then I had a little piece of this play set on a farm where a girl was missing. And then I thought, oh, well, what if I tied that together with the missing kids? And so I had 2 scenes, and they weren't meth heads. They weren't recovering meth addicts. They were sort of in Northern California on an almond farm. But because this was for Oregon Shakespeare, I was sitting in my room at Oregon Shakespeare, and you get only local television channels because you don't have cable, and on every channel it was either for a meth clinic, like you can get meth recovery, or sell your gold teeth, we'll take your fillings for cash. And so I was like, boy, the meth problem here is terrible. And I started
what a great business idea, though.
Yeah. Going on my computer, and sure enough, like Oregon and meth, it was a huge problem, and so that's where that play sort of came down in societal culture to the family, that the Callahans that the play now is centered around, and that's where that began. And then the families of all the missing kids, they became sort of this swirling group of Americans, of just parents, around. And so the B one, that was what the other play was. The play set on the almond farm was the one I had when I had originally heard about colony collapse disorder. I thought it was so interesting, this idea of a missing girl and missing bees. The idea of this one thing, this one tiny creature that, should they be wiped off the planet? And this was when it first hit, like 2006, 2007, and it was just growing at vast numbers, and no one knew what it was. Like the idea that the food that the food supply
the
could
ripple effect of a seemingly insignificant thing
could be have such a huge impact. And then the idea of families falling apart on our society, or addiction, or the idea of one by one, like things that destroy families and what it does. And not like that I'm a big family values person. I mean, it's not about values. It's about noticing these small things. So it's like taking the two things and just sort of saying, our failing ecology and our failings as families. That one kid in each family that we just miss. I mean, it depends on your family, I guess. But the one black sheep in the family sometimes. That the kid who becomes the heroin addict in the family, or the kid that some families have more of them than others, or the whole family implodes.
We have a couple minutes left, and something I found really intriguing was when you were talking about the process of creating this play and the aha moment you had in development when you figured out how to integrate the parents. Can you talk about that? Who the parents are in your play and how they became integrated into the overall piece?
So as you can see, I sort of pieced together these three elements, and I had the girl, who is a narrator, the missing girl, and I had this chorus. There's sort of a Greek chorus of they are the parents of missing and dead children. And then I have this story, which is a more realistic story of these people trying to run an apple orchard, and their estranged son comes back. And so that's a more sort of realistic long play going on in the middle. But they felt like three stories orbiting around each other. And May Adralis, we did a workshop, and she invited designers to come in, which I think everybody should always do, because I always write leaving room for the designers, and she said, well, let's bring them into the room. So we had a sound designer who was playing live sound in the room, and there was a set designer there, and I went up to her and I said, most of the play takes place on this orchard, and there's the house. And then 2 scenes take place 2 hours away in Jason's mom's house. And I assume it's sort of going to be the same house, and we'll sort of switch the furniture around, and maybe the chorus will move it. But, that feels weird to me that, I said, how do you just sort of basically envision that, And she said, yeah, it's the farmhouse, and it's Nikki's house. Nikki's the mom. And it's also, the house of all the moms in the chorus. And May and I just looked at each other, and we were like, yes! And suddenly, the house belonged to everybody. So there's just this house structure, and so everybody's in the house at the same time. And so suddenly, when somebody needed a plate, one of the mothers or fathers from the chorus might be in there using a plate, and there's the plate on the table. And it just opened up this theatricality so that she didn't have to go off stage and fry an egg, and we didn't have to get that sound cue of egg frying, or, It's like suddenly she's like, do you want an egg? And then the plate is right there. So we could speed up time. We could do all these fun things. And there was room for humor. There were some funny moments that came out. And the play is very dramatic, so it brought in some necessary humor. Maybe, Mark yells because he wants to turn off the radio, but maybe 2 of the moms are listening to this really trashy radio program. And so when he does, they're kind of like, hey, we were listening to that, who turned off the radio? And so there's just these there was so much room to play and explore. And then there were also rules we had to set up. In some production, you could have 1 million props. In this production, where you can't have 1 million props, we have to decide, are we only going to have props for the Callahans and not for the chorus? Or are we going to do that? But it opened up a theatricality, but most of all, it blended these 3 worlds that it also always felt like, and now we go back to the girl, and now we go to the chorus, and now we go to the plot, and now we go back to the chorus. And now suddenly they were dovetailing, and then suddenly, the chorus would speak in the middle of a scene. And, it just felt really exciting. All the rules went out the window, or all the possibilities opened up. And that's just always so exciting. And then Jessica and I started working together, and she goes, okay, so what are our rules? I said, I don't know. we got to figure this out. So, and that was really great because we knew we had this production coming. So we were like, okay, we have to figure out what the rules are because there have to be some rules. But that's been really exciting, and to figure out how they serve the play. I didn't want the chorus, though, to just become mice who deliver props. And I think that was a part of my original question was I didn't want the chorus to just change the house to become Nikki's house. Mm-hmm. And so by also having it be their house, when they do have to move a table or something, they're doing it as part of their own.
It's their table.
It's their table, and they're doing their own thing and helping to move something else. Mm-hmm. So it's always good when things have resonance in that way.
Right. Well, I'm not just saying this because I work there, but I really can't wait for this play to open.
Thank you.
And I think this is a good place to stop. Thank you to Stefanie Zadravec for spending time with us today. Her play, Colony Collapse, opens at the Theater at Boston Court in Pasadena, February 20th. Follow Stefanie on Twitter at Steph Zadravec. That is STEFZADRAVEC. The Subtext is brought to you by a few awesome and generous people, starting with Bill Bordy, whose generous financial support makes LA Stage Alliance's At This Stage magazine happen. Go to thisstage.la and find an archive of this show and lots of other great performing arts content. Thank you to John for recording these episodes, and thank you to Danny Oliver for making everything happen. The theme song is by International Pen Pal. You can find them on iTunes. I recommend you do so. Alrighty, end of episode. Next month, my guest is Baba Booey.